Hello and welcome back to Parley. This one was paid for by PistilWhip. Hope you'll enjoy listening. It's about, dino nuggets and plastic, but we'll get to that. PistilWhip says, a low effort July Parley about the true self, the false self, and the illusion of free choice, featuring dinosaurs, plastic, chicken nuggets, and children's mouths. Indeed, it does. When I get sent these parlay that are a meme, I, there's anything you do is that you over explain the meme, because content. I don't know. My job is to explain things to some extent, but it doesn't do anything when I do that for something like this. So we're just gonna look at it, and I'm gonna talk about hopefully relevant, or I'm just going to ramble while that happens because there's nothing to say really. This is the and yet a trace of the true self exists in the false self thing, where I am actually going to over explain the joke, but not too much. Which is that the my summary of this meme is there's a comically reductive, like a farcical version of the origin ingredient is in a very future version of itself. The future version of the thing is a farcical imitation of its past self, in an ironic and comical way. That's what it is. And then, of course, at the end, we have the illusion of free choice. Both the oil and the chicken are going to go into a child's mouth. Why are we here just to suffer? I am become dino nuggets and plastic. You didn't give me anything else for this parlay, which I don't think it's right to call it a low effort parlay. Pistol Whip, you're going to get people to not submit these kinds of parlays if you make it sound bad like that. It's not. These are really fun. Parlay is as good as it is, and I think it's good. Maybe you all don't, but I hope you do. You're watching it, because there's a balance of very short, succinct, open-ended parlay and much longer. I'm kind of responding to a short essay the person wrote, parlay. There's enough of that, and there's enough of the short thing. It's a good balance. You don't have to feel like it's bad to do one or the other. You're not doing something wrong if you write a really long one or a really short one. Well, the really long one within reason, but they're fine. It's okay. It's not low effort. It's supposed to be low effort. You bought a product, or I actually happen to know off the top of my head you were gifted this, but and I'm the one who's supposed to do the thing, right? Don't worry about low effort. That's fine. In the first place, who the heck cares about effort? What the heck is effort good for? Can you eat it? I didn't think so. Anyway, so yeah, what we're gonna do for this is, I don't know, because there's no stated direction. So usually what I do in these is I include a bit of myself and I talk about whatever I want. So let's do that. And yeah, I mean, it might not be something you immediately think you want, but go with me for a second. Where I want to start with this beautiful meme is unfortunately some existentialism. What, for the purposes of this meme, is the true self? If you're not serious, I am. Philosophically, what, how does this meme work? While I over explained the joke already, as I'm wont to do, we're now going to over explain the philosophy, which isn't meant to be taken seriously. And I would say that starts with seeing how the word true here is it's a version of the word true that means more like original, and false means more like constructed or crafted. So another way to word this that is much less funny is, a trace of the original self exists in the constructed self. Ooh, that happens to humans. Interesting. I think it's interesting anyway. So I am become Dino Nuggets. Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting claim to suggest that humans' true selves are their original selves, and then the false self is the more current one, and it's constructed. So let's look at me. I'm the example we have. Was me when I'm 5 more me than when how I am now? Than when how I am now? My parents think so. An interesting thing that immediately pops to mind is that me and everybody else I know say that I'm a lot different than when I was younger, except for my parents. And they're the only ones who would know how I was when I was like 5, right? Really, who would have had the experience. Perhaps a babysitter here and there, but and mine weren't great. Sorry, previous babysitters. I'm sure they're not listening to this. They weren't. They didn't know me that well, in my opinion. But sure, they experienced a lot of me. And yeah, so interesting. Does that mean that I've slingshotted back to being more like my original self? This proposes a philosophical conundrum about the nature of us kind of progressing ourselves that has bothered me for a long time. And it's this: are we just stalling from the sort of core concerns that we have whenever we do essentially anything that appears to be growth? In other words, is it essentially being less and less true to ourselves when we grow? Or is our previous self essentially no longer a factor at some point? And what bothers me about this is that I think yes, but almost all of psychology, for example, says no. If that's a bit too abstract, what I mean is, so when I was younger, I was really uncomfortable with a lot of physical sensations or just many new things. And I do think it's fair as a pure immature child to look at the world and say, why things got to be so all over the place all the time? Why is there so many new things happening to me constantly? That's not that weird, but I definitely had more of a problem with it than other people, and not just when I was 5 years old. I remember this thing when I was in maybe first grade. They wanted you to, I don't know what it was actually, like do math or something, in shaving cream on a table. And the sensation of the shaving cream all over my hands made me like nearly vomit, like that type of thing. Like, I hate that. I'm sure a number of you can relate to that. I only found out later in my life that's actually not that uncommon. That's not that weird, but it didn't make me feel great about myself when I was in first grade because I was an idiot in first grade. That's how I feel. And now I've come quite a long way from feeling like that. I would describe myself as an uncommonly adaptable person, whereas previously I was probably one of the least adaptable people you would have met. And the reason that happened is because naturally feel opposed to those feelings, right? I adapted to them when my mom asked, like, you wear sunglasses in the car? You hate the feeling of having glasses on your face. And I said, well, yeah, but it's bad for your eyes. I'm sick of being blind when I'm driving at 60 miles per hour. Wear sunglasses when it's put sunglasses in your car. There, get some $10 sunglasses and put them in your car. Anyway, I did that because I got sick of it. Like, I just got pissed off of things feeling terrible all the time and thought, you know what? Is it possible for me to not be bothered by these things? Because if it is, I need to do that. I'm sick of this. Screw this. I want to not suffer through this stuff anymore. Like, I want to just be okay with that. And so I've focused a lot on that in my life. And nowadays, I think of myself as enjoying those things. However, there's a lot of teaching from psychology that tells us that many of our concerns are rooted in youth, in the things that bothered us when we were younger. Maybe I'm not truly comfortable with all those things. And in fact, assaulting myself with new experiences, Parley itself, is something that I'm deep, 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 deep down truly uncomfortable with. But I'm just extremely elaborately lying to myself because there's a sort of esoteric benefit. Like, I feel like it would be good if I wasn't that way. So I'm trying to make it appear as much as possible that I am okay with that, but I'm just not. Now, I really don't think that's true, but I kind of wouldn't know. That's how everybody thinks, right? I am not so arrogant as to not realize that essentially everybody who's in this situation thinks that it isn't true about them, that they really do know how they feel. But statistically, most of them are wrong, so there's not a great reason for me to think I'm just different and special and I actually do know, right? The reason I and many other, well, I'm not much of an authority, but authorities don't give people certain types of advice is because they know that everybody is going to think, oh, I'm the exception to the rule. I can, the rules don't apply to me. Do you need to stop at a red light if it is 4 a.m. and you can see for miles and there are no cars coming? Like this, I'm not saying you shouldn't stop. I think there's a good reason why we have rules like this. And we don't say, hey, that's an exception, so go ahead. We don't do that. You should still stop at the red light if you want to say it that way, because we don't want people to be drawing the line themselves. We don't want some schmuck's judgment about it to be to tell them that that's acceptable, right? If they're willing to go by this time, how little do they need to be able to know that there are no cars coming for them to go? You see what I mean? I mean, this is probably obvious to most people. But you see what I'm trying to say, right? Like, I accept that logic readily, so I shouldn't think that I know any better. Therefore, it makes sense to assume, or it's safer to assume, that maybe I really don't feel this way that I've constructed for myself. Can you construct a new version of yourself that is meaningfully free from those things when you're younger? Now, when I put it that way, it's starting to sound like, well, wait a minute, it would be kind of ridiculous to think you can't at all, right? You're telling me you can never, ever change at all those things you were concerned about when you were younger? That doesn't seem right. So you see the problem, right? It would be pretty ridiculous to assume that we perfectly know for sure when we've gotten kind of free of certain concerns from when we were younger. Yet, it must be possible to get free of those things, right? So when are we? And why does it matter? Well, it matters because am I stressing myself out by doing this for a living, or am I correct in assuming that I have truly come to enjoy it? You see what I mean? I mean, this is a whole life decision, right? Am I structuring my life in a way that systematically makes me miserable and stressed out in a very deeply buried way that I just sort of am covering up or am preventing myself from knowing about? Or do I really enjoy doing this kind of thing? How can I know that? How do I make a decision about that? I think, again, the problem for me isn't so much that for me, myself, I can't give you a lot of reasoning, and I don't want to make this even more than it already is about me. It's more that in terms of the population overall, it's just so overwhelmingly common that most people, they don't know. For a given person, if you think you know the thing, you probably don't. It's very likely that there is some deep-seated insecurity that nearly everybody has. And so again, it just seems a little ridiculous to consider myself so different. And so instead, I thought a little bit as I was planning this parlay for a couple of minutes before I started it. What is a good way to tackle that subject? Right? I'm at least for this parlay, we're not going to go down the path of, well, let's just assume Zandy is like an alien and does know differently. Like, no, let's not. Alien sneezing. And instead, let's talk about something else I think is significant, which is the difference between what I'm going to call the false self. I said maybe you could consider it to be a constructed self, and a response to that self. This meme is about the concept that something is a sort of comic facsimile of its original self. The plastic dinosaurs are a comic facsimile of real dinosaurs, which, humorously, they're actually made of a byproduct of. That's sort of the idea. So the difference I'm trying to draw out is there's a difference between, we'll just use the term false self here. The false self, which is a comic facsimile of the original, and a further enough false self version that is no longer a comic facsimile of the original. You see what I mean? Oh, let's use the chicken nuggets one. You eat the chicken nuggets, and then your human body that you grew some muscle tissue with the protein in the chicken nuggets, you are no longer a comic facsimile of dinosaurs. You see what I mean? You've taken it a step further, and or some more steps further, enough that it no longer fits the meme. Let's call that state of being for your personality is where I'm going to go with it. But that concept, let's that we need a name for that for the purposes of this parlay. I kind of want to call it the crafted self. I hope me using constructed earlier isn't too confusing. So the false self, the comic facsimile of the original, and the crafted self, something that is a further enough false self that it is no longer a comic facsimile of the original. So the thing I want to explore is rather than seeing if we've become free of some internal hangups that we likely can't know, or it would be very arrogant to assume we know. If you're feeling like, no, I'm really sure that, I am not held hostage by anything from my childhood, it's like, well, statistically, you are wrong. So it's probably safer to at least approach it from a different direction. And that's what I'm going to do, even though I, and probably like some of you, really feel like that's not the case for me. Well, why do I feel like it's not the case for me? I guess it's because I've changed enough times that it feels odd that I'm responding to those things. No, it feels like I'm responding to the false self, not to the original. That's what it feels like to me. So, okay, let's explore that instead. Because really, all I'm trying to say is that I think I changed more times than, sure, a lot of people my age. I'm 30, and I have experienced that compared to my peers, and a good amount of my peers are people who were, fairly well off. With there's some privilege to acknowledge in the lives we've led. And that means that they had some time to address these things. They had the privilege to address these mental hangups. Go see a good therapist, some of them, or talk about them with friends, open up and feel like they were safe to do so, etc. That is a kind of privilege. And so I think that the people that a good number of people I've met in my life are also probably in the high percentile of being in touch with themselves among humanity. And so if I feel like I've gone through more changes than they have, that may be a meaningful difference while we avoid assuming that it makes me somehow aware of these mental landmines from my childhood. Maybe we can still talk about what that means for me without assuming arrogantly that I know about some, again, like emotional landmine from when I was a kid. Whatever. And honestly, I'm just not interested in that because I think that I'm not vulnerable to those things. It's not interesting to me to explore them. So fine, let's just look at something else. What is this crafted self? Like, let me give you a few examples. You're thinking like, so what is it, right? Well, when I was a kid, I you need some spark notes on child Zandy. I was really into mathematics, like equations, calculation, math. You know that in the United States, there's what's it called? The math. There's like a math challenge between schools, friendly competition of medium seriousness between different schools in like elementary school and high school. Mathletics. That doesn't sound right. It has a name, right? But anyway, I did that. I was, decent at that. I got very good grades and cared about my grades, though only because of my parents. No offense, mom and dad. I understand why you wanted me to care about that a bit, and you made me care about it in a way less toxic way than a lot of my peers. So it's fine. My parents and I have already talked about this, so they know. But I did care about that, though not much for personal reasons. I was extremely socially anxious and shy and awkward. I didn't have a lot of friends, but I had very close friends, the friends I had. I remember those people very well because I spent a ton of time with them. Very interesting cast of characters in my early life. I went to a very small, very expensive, but I don't know, teachers weren't so good. Private school. And a weird thing about the private school I went to is that it was a kindergarten to eighth grade. They actually technically had ninth grade, but it was very small. Weird, super weird, but that was the thing they did. So I was there from kindergarten through first, second, third, fourth, blah, 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 till eighth grade with not the exact same group of people, obviously, but it wasn't that different, right? I did know a lot of those people for 9 years. In fact, one or two of them actually went to the same high school as me, so I knew them for like over half their life, well over half their life. They changed a lot. They changed a lot too. In fact, that's a significant factor for this discussion. I got to see someone else who I wasn't particularly close to, but I'm thinking of a specific kid in that class change over the course of like over 10 years of formative time. Right, during which I also changed significantly. But I started out as someone who cared a lot about math and the right answer and there being one right answer, and I was extremely reserved and didn't really talk to or open up to people that much, and really disliked. I've always disliked school, but I disliked it because of like social comfort at the time. I will go on to be a person who still dislikes school, but for a very different reason. That will go on to be the only thing I like about school when I'm in college. And I'll instead dislike it for the very thing that I liked about it when I was in elementary school, which is this whole idea of right answers, which are just useless in my current opinion. Like, that's not valuable. You should look them up on the internet or, memorize the ones that are useful frequently enough that that's a hassle and move on. It's not book smarts are pointless is sort of my I wouldn't normally put it that way, but for the purposes of this parlay, I would say that's more or less my perspective. Someone who knows an encyclopedic amount of book smarts, like, I wouldn't be disrespectful to this person because what an idiot for investing all that time. Though I do have some questions about why they thought that was so valuable or why the education system thought that was so valuable. I would love to hear answers to those questions, but I'm not going to, I don't know, like, be mean to the person or whatever. People choose to invest their time in whatever misguided thing, right? I don't know. I didn't know that getting into video games so much would be useful to me. It was, but I didn't know that, right? Like, that doesn't make me smart. That makes me lucky. I don't know, like a lucky member of the randomness. But anyway, young Zandy. In high school, I got very depressed and frustrated with the right answerness, and I started writing a lot of poetry. I spent a lot of time running the school's coffee house, or like kind of present an art thing. Someone plays a nice song on guitar and sings. Somebody does like a comedy act, maybe. I don't know that people did that. It was a fairly serious coffee house. Let me say, there were some pretty good people at that coffee house. And I often performed a lot. I set it up. I was the lead tech for setting up the lights, and it was recorded, so we recorded it, and I set that up. And frequently went first because everybody else was a coward and didn't want to go first. I was also part of the like school literary magazine that my school had. So this tells you a lot about my high school, right? It was a very arty high school, and I was one of the people who helped edit submissions to that. So I read about half of the things that people submitted and worked through editing with them. This kind of forced me to get some social chops that then went from being a weakness to a strength during this 4 years of my life. And I started feeling like the having a single right answer was just useless. There was just no purpose to that. As it became more and more absurd objectively during the education system in my high school years, right? Once you're at a sort of intermediate level, you want to know your times tables, like, that's useful to everybody. But once you get to trigonometry, there's a big question about whether that is really useful to most people. I'm not sure I totally agree that it isn't. But you get what I'm trying to say, right? Like, at a certain level of education, objectively, it just is more of a weirdness. Like, why are we learning these specific things? They're obviously not useful to a layperson. Whereas when you were in elementary school, you might have felt like that, but it's kind of objectively less true. These are general surface level enough things that you really probably should know them. And really, it would have been better if I spent some of that high school time learning, I don't know, for example, things about taxes would have been more practical. Just as a simple example, sex ed. I had an uncommonly good sexual education program at my school. Okay, I'm just saying that to give them credit. It wasn't great, but it was a lot better than most people had it basically none. So I don't know. It was good, I guess. Anyway, this was a transition point for me. And so in high school, I had a lot of difficulty, and a lot of things happened that I'm not telling you anything about that were major factors in my life, that caused me to flip. And I think this is not uncommon. This change is, I would argue, the false self getting constructed. I know that might have been a lot of detail for a little while, but hopefully you're following along. We've left original Zandy, and now there's a current version of Zandy that is acting largely in response to being the original Zandy. There were things that were problems about that original Zandy, and this false self Zandy, false sounds like a bad word here, but who I've become at this stage of my life seems to be a pretty easily identifiable response to who I was before. Does that make sense? You can easily imagine a different kid who was way into the arts and stuff when they were younger and who embraced the value of academia for whatever merits it has in this same period of time. And I think a lot of what's going on here, like, I don't have a lot of, I feel bad saying this, but respect for these changes. What's going on here, I think, is that I just grass is greenered myself, if you will, into, a person who was the opposite, more or less, of who I was before. And I also think that when you're a teenager, it's quite common to have this feeling like you have a maximum desire for freedom, but still very little actual freedom. And so there's a desire to just do things willfully, even when it just sort of doesn't matter at all. Be a new person just kind of because. A lot of people do that when they go through different stages of schooling or go to different schools too. And I think it doesn't go far beyond that. I don't think that anything I did in high school was a particularly wise thing to have done or like a good response. It was just an obvious response. Like, no, I wouldn't blame myself, but it wasn't like a smart or wise way to respond to the situation. It was just the sort of clear response, something psychology to how I'd been. It's not really until college that I would identify, and this is mostly the end of this section for me. It was not really until college that I would identify something I wouldn't do now, but which a past version of me did, which was like not an obvious response to the situation and was smart, which was going berserk trying to meet new people. Like, I went way beyond normal social convention to meet new people in college, and that is the best decision I have ever made in my entire life. I may have made no good decisions except for that, except for Parley too, because otherwise I wouldn't be pairing all this out, right? But my point is that I think for a lot of people, they're sort of around high school and college false self that responds to their original self, if you want to think of it that way. This is kind of a simplification, but you get it. For my experience is that most people I've known throughout those years in my life, I'm thinking of 3 or 4 examples, and that's a very small sample size, but it's what I've got. And looking at how other people, at least how they talk about their lives, it seems like most people are still that person. They are still that false self person. And my experience, like the way it's looking like it's going for a lot of people around me currently, it looks like they're going to stay that person. You know what I mean? It doesn't look to me like they're going to make a large further iteration on that person. But I did, definitely. And that is why I think this is worth exploring. Was that good? Why did I do that? Is it anything more than just a response to a response? Is this actually good? Did I come back to the original self a little bit? Like, did I dispel the false self? I am a little more like that original Zandy, according to my parents, but it's my parents, right? Like maybe that just feels like a nice story to them. No offense, parents. I'm just saying you're vulnerable to biases too. Talked about my parents, not a lot, but a lot more than usual in this parlay. So you see the conundrum, right? And I'm not the only human who's done that. What's going on here? Why? Or what factors led to me doing that thing? Because it wasn't a failure of the previous personality. It wasn't. Things were going fine in my first year of college, where I was more or less acting the way I had in high school. And it was okay. Like nothing terrible happened or anything. No, I would say, if anything, the reasoning was that I got scared, I guess. And this was the reason I think that there's something different about this change is that the thing I got scared of isn't something about me. It was something about like living in this society at the moment, which was that as I was in college, I thought to myself, you're not gonna be able to meet people this way ever again. There's never going to be a sort of societal excuse to meet new people who you have some good reason to believe you would mesh with in some way ever again. There's never going to be anywhere near as good, anyway, a way to do that. Our society is broken and hasn't built that in anywhere, but it makes life, it ruins your life if you don't do it, if you don't have enough people like that. It makes life stale. You don't have any other people to bounce things off of that are like a good choice for someone to bounce things off of. Obviously, having human companionship is nice, but I'm talking about people who have real synergy with you and really provoke something about you, or are an interesting response to you themselves. That's valuable, and I just didn't see how you would likely get that, anywhere near as potently as you can get it in college. And that's just true. That's not a thing about me. Now, other people might not realize it as much, but they're just wrong for not realizing it, according to me. Yeah, I realized it more readily because I figure I was really awkward in the past. And so I understood as I'd been getting better at that and thought, wow, here in college, that's way easier because of all these like objectively true things about college, or at least the type of college I went to. But that won't be true going forward as far as I knew at the time. And I think I was mostly correct. I think I underestimated the extent to which most other humans are aware of this problem, but I was mostly correct about the fact that there isn't really a solution. People are just a little more on my side than I thought they were, which doesn't matter much because there's nothing we can do about it. But in theory, it's a little better than I thought. Right. So the point is that change, well, it wasn't really predicated on something that comes from me as much as something that just sort of is. Like if you gave everybody infinite time to think about things, that would be a much more common choice than people just changing into some response to themselves around when they were a teenager. This would be a thing you would expect most people to eventually conclude was a problem. You see what I mean? And so there is a way in which, while it might not be me free of the shackles of my younger self, like the whole premise, you remember at the beginning, was to avoid assuming that, there is still something we can say that maybe that was a more meaningful decision than the false self for me in high school. And the more meaningful part is that it isn't something purely coming from my own limited perspective. It was a decision that came from a moment where I realized something that is kind of just true for most people. That just kind of is a problem, period. It wasn't really because it was a problem specifically for me. I had an uncommonly large number of close people in my life, I think, at that point. So, uh, yeah, like that was very different. I had a friend who had a kind of a funny similar version where he had always been even more shy. Like he in high school was like me in elementary school, and that's when we got to know each other a little bit. And he's changed a lot over the years too. He's an example I was thinking about throughout this parlay. But an interesting response he made that isn't really the same as a point of comparison is he started using dating apps a lot. Now, you got to understand, this is like the last person you've ever met who you would think would use and not to be rude, let alone succeed a lot on dating apps. It's not that he's not like a nice looking, very, very nice guy who's an extremely interesting person. It's not because of that. It's just because it doesn't seem like he would feel comfortable doing that or want to, or not at all to be rude. He and I have talked about this before, but like it just doesn't seem like he would strike that much of a chord with people on these services. But for whatever reason, through his ingenuity, he has repeatedly found like pretty good partners through mundane dating apps, which like it's not like it's impossible to do that anyway. I'm not trying to look at, not talking crap about dating apps, whatever. I'm just saying it doesn't seem like it, like this is the most successful man in the world on dating apps at pursuing serious relationships, and I swear he is the last person you would have thought that would it was just strange, it was surprising. However, I do think that that is a more personal response. While a good idea, while that has been a boon to his life, it isn't the same thing as identifying, like he was identifying a personal need. I want to gain romantic experience. Whereas what I was talking about was a problem with having human connection for everyone, regardless of whether I had human connection. I was dating someone I really liked, had lots of friends. In college, I dated multiple people consensually. You know, we all agreed to do that for quite a while. So this wasn't something that I needed this less than pretty much everybody there. I just identified it as a need, not for me at the time, just a need, period. And it only really came around to benefit me. You know, it's been what, 7 or 8 years since then. And only now am I really reaping the full reward of having invested my time in that. If I hadn't met those people, I would be kind of cornered the way that I've conducted my life now. And only because I chose to do that am I not. On the other hand, I would argue that what my friend did was something that, while a good choice, didn't really change like the fabric of the way his life was going. Like he could have done it later in life too. Whereas this was something I couldn't have done later. Not the way I was meeting people in college, which like that's just going to be a big Zandy lore mystery because I don't want to get into it right now. But you get a lot of let's use the term, this was in another parlay and I didn't say anything about it, so we'll say it now. Liminal spaces, that's the answer. You don't, it's very rare for people to be in liminal spaces, like between activities, in kind of public, but they're not doing anything right this second. And it is less weird than normal to go up to them and legitimately try to meet this person and know them and have them be part of your life. That just isn't really possible in the same way in any other environment that I can think of, except maybe the workplace, but the workplace selects for a very different type of people. And there's also a sort of duress in the workplace. You're all being paid to be there. Not making trouble in the workplace is more of a threat that I think people really underestimate how much that matters. If you've ever flirted with someone in the workplace, you should be thinking about this subject. Let's just leave it at that. But in college, at least for me, the only time I've been able to think of where this is less true is in college. You should still be polite when you flirt with people. But I'm not really talking about flirting with people. I'm just saying that it's very difficult to get to know someone without a kind of social event, agenda, excuse. It's kind of none of those things. But you see what I'm trying to say, like a sort of pretext, maybe you would say, which is we are college students. That's kind of it. That's sort of the only good. There is no like real reason, but there's enough of a reason, this one moment in your life to do that thing. Anyway, I knew people were going to let me get away with, I said it's just going to be a secret of Zandy lore. And the moment I said that, I thought, well, people are either going to ask you and you're going to answer later, or you can answer now. So there it is. But the point I'm trying to say is, throughout that whole process, that was a moment where I think changed meaningfully again and acted a way I wouldn't have before, meaningfully valued different underlying things, didn't just change my behavior, but really became a functionally different person in the short term. And I think that the quality of that change was different than the first one because it wasn't just a response to who I was previously. It was a response to my now gained perspective on the world. And while that was still a pretty meager perspective, I do think that that's if you're in college, you should use the time to meet a lot of new people. Don't burn those bridges. Or if you did, reach out and try to reconnect. You'd be surprised how often it works. Especially a good piece of advice I was given relatively recently in my life. If you've tried to reconnect with someone and you don't have any reason to believe that they don't want to reconnect with you, like nothing bad happened or whatever, don't catastrophize. If there's nothing obvious, then it's probably fine. It's probably fine. And they say nothing. If you try to reconnect with someone and they just say nothing, try again in a little while, like 6 months or a year, a while. Wait a while. They're probably just busy, like you, and you would be shocked how often a second try works. That was the way the advice was framed to me. Provided there's no good reason for it to fail, and you've really thought about it. You shouldn't ask a million times. Don't badger the person. Fine. It shouldn't be such a big deal anyway. Like, you should find enough people that it isn't the end of the world to connect with that one person. But it's okay to try 2 times rather than 1 or 5. Maybe don't do that. You would be surprised how often that works out well. Again, it's just like you. Like, they're just busy, there's stuff going on, and it isn't really that much to do with whether they want to talk to you. In fact, seeing you try again with enough time having passed that it's clear that this matters to you and wasn't just a whim, that stands out from how other people have reached out. And again, I think you would be pleasantly surprised how often that will end well. Doesn't hurt to try, and worst case, you badgered them with a random text message 2 times ever in their life. No offense, but as long as you're being respectful to the person, cry me a river, right? Like, it's okay to try to say hi to someone after a little while. You're not going to hurt them, provided you've thought about whether that will hurt them. This changes a lot if they're like an ex-partner, maybe. Anyway, nobody really asked for this part of the parlay, but anyway, I hope I've kind of made my point. I don't really have anywhere further to take it at the moment, but the subject that there might be something kind of different about that type of change, and how can we evaluate those types of things? Obviously, my opinion is that kind of change is better, like good. There's something more reliably progressive about that type of change, where you've identified a problem with life in general and changed because of that. Rather than just be like things feel stagnant sometimes and you feel like changing. I don't think that does much. I think most people just responding to their circumstances won't make progress. They're not becoming a steadily better version of themselves by very much. You need to identify things beyond yourself to do that. And at that point, I think it's safe to argue that I just don't really care if my previous hangups are still somehow haunting me. I'm going to focus on the things that I can know for sure are things that will be a problem no matter what, and try to find solutions to them, rather than focusing on things that I may or may not be haunted on from when I was 5. Not because that's not valuable. Not because that's not valuable. More because I already did it. When I was previous versions of myself, that's what I was doing. I feel like I have engaged with that subject. And indeed, many of the things I identified as these universal principles or whatever are things that come a little bit from my biases as a child or whatever. But they maybe don't die on the hill of those things. Maybe I don't matter quite that much. And it's okay to think about what would just be good, and have faith that I'm not an alien. I will enjoy things that are just a good way to live your life. I feel like that's been mostly true. I don't really care if parlay is secretly stressing me out a little bit. The benefits outweigh that, if it is. You know what? Like, come at me, internal stress. Whatever. The benefits outweigh the detriments. Thanks for asking this parlay, PistilWhip. I hope you didn't mind me kind of indulging a philosophical point that I feel like is relevant and has been on my mind historically a lot, and reminded me of this meme. This meme reminded me of it. So I hope you had fun. I mean, in the first place, it was a very open-ended one, so I know you know what to expect from these. But I hope it was a fun little journey.